They say the cross protects the living. But in the village of Mbala, the cross became the reason the dead would not sleep. It began with the arrival of the priest. His name was Father Gabriel, pale, solemn, and soft-spoken. He came riding through the mists one morning, the sun hidden behind clouds like a shy god. The villagers watched from behind their huts as he passed, whispering blessings in a language no one understood. He said he had come to bring light. But from the moment he arrived, the shadows began to move differently. Children stopped laughing near the river. Goats bleated through the night as if they could see things no man could. And at sunset, when the priest prayed, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He built a small church on the edge of the forest, a forest so ancient that even the elders refused to cut its trees. But Father Gabriel said he heard voices from within it, voices calling for salvation. He said the forest was hungry for redemption. Then, one by one, the villagers began to change. Some forgot their own names. Others woke with strange symbols carved into their skin. The church bells rang on their own, echoing across the hills long after midnight. And still Father Gabriel smiled. He said the darkness was being driven out. But in truth it was waking up. No one knew what he carried in his prayers, or what truly glowed behind his eyes when he whispered to the trees. Because Father Gabriel was never sent by the church. He was sent by something else. Something buried. Something that had finally found a voice. And when the people of Mbala realized it, it was already too late. The year was 1896. The rains had come early to the land of Mbala, a village tucked between rolling hills and a forest the people called Obentiu, the place of the first spirits. The trees of Obentiu were so tall that their crowns seemed to touch the sky, and the villagers said the forest breathed. They meant it literally. At night, if you stood at its edge, you could hear the whisper of air through hollow roots, like something exhaling from beneath the earth. No one went in. No one ever returned who did. The people of Mbala lived simple lives. They rose with the sun, worked the red soil, and rested when the drums called across the valley. The old women wove tales while mending nets, and the young men hunted in the foothills. Faith for them was older than stone. They prayed to the spirits of their ancestors, left offerings under the great Iroko tree, and believed that all things, the wind, the river, the flame, had a voice if one only listened long enough. Then the white men came. First they came with rifles and papers. Later with books and crosses. They called their mission a light for the dark continent. But to Mbala, it felt like a shadow cast long and cold across the sun. Villages nearby had burned or vanished. People were taken to build railroads they would never see finished. When the word came that a priest would visit Mbala, a man of God bringing mercy and order, the elders bowed reluctantly. Better to show respect than invite wrath. He came at dawn, riding a mule thin as bone, with two boys carrying a wooden chest behind him. His robe was brown, stained with travel, and his eyes were the color of stagnant water, pale, unblinking. His name was Father Gabriel. He spoke softly, each word measured like a prayer written long before he was born. He greeted the chief, offered a Bible wrapped in cloth, and bowed his head so low the villagers felt uneasy. The chief, old and cautious, welcomed him with palm wine and said, "Our gods are older than the hills, Father. But if your God brings peace, he is welcome here." Father Gabriel smiled then, a smile that showed no warmth, only teeth. "All gods bow to the one who made them," he said quietly. "And I am here to remind them of that." He asked for a place to build a chapel, and though the people were reluctant, he chose the spot himself, on the very edge of Obentiu forest. The elders objected. "That is where the ancestors sleep," one warned. "The ground remembers blood." But Father Gabriel's pale hand waved away their fear. "It is the Lord's will," he said. "And the Lord's will cannot be afraid." So he built it. Day by day, the sound of hammering echoed through the valley. The villagers helped, half out of curiosity, half out of fear of the man's quiet authority. Children carried water, men lifted timber, women brought food and left quickly. Father Gabriel's boys, silent, thin, their eyes dull, did most of the work. They spoke to no one. At night, they carried oil lamps into the forest and did not return until dawn. When the chapel was finished, it gleamed strangely in the sun, a small white structure with a cross that seemed too heavy for its roof. Inside, Father Gabriel painted symbols on the walls. They were not in the villagers' language, nor Latin, nor anything they'd ever seen before. When asked, he said, "They are the words of salvation." But the old women whispered that the symbols looked more like warnings than blessings. First all seemed well. Father Gabriel preached every Sunday, reading from his book with a voice that could make even the air stand still. Some villagers came to listen, curious about this God who promised eternal life. He told them their ancestors were lost souls, that the forest's whispers were lies, that the spirits they prayed to were demons wearing familiar faces. He offered baptism to those who would renounce the old ways. A few accepted, hoping to find favor with the newcomers. They knelt in the river while he poured water on their heads. But those who were baptized began to dream strange things. One woman woke screaming that she had seen her dead husband staring at her from the forest, his mouth sewn shut. Another man stopped speaking entirely, his tongue swollen black overnight. Still Father Gabriel smiled. "The old gods resist," he said. "It means the Lord's work is being done." But the forest grew restless. Birds stopped nesting near its edge. The sound of insects faded, leaving only an eerie hum that rose from the soil at dusk. Hunters found strange footprints, human yet not. And the great Iroko tree, under which the villagers had buried their ancestors for centuries, began to bleed sap the color of rust. Chief Nwosu, worried for his people, went to speak with the priest. He found Father Gabriel kneeling before the altar, whispering in a language that was neither English nor Latin. The air was cold around him, though the fire burned bright. When the chief asked what he was doing, the priest looked up slowly and said, "Praying for the soul of this land. It has been possessed too long." That night the first death came. A young boy named Chika, the son of the village drummer, vanished after following the priest's boys toward the forest. His mother searched until dawn. All they found was his drum floating in the river, its hide torn open. The next morning, Father Gabriel held a sermon. He said the boy had been claimed by darkness, and urged the people to stand firm in faith. But he did not mourn. And the villagers noticed something else. Chika's name was carved into the church's wooden door, scratched deep as if by nails. When questioned, Father Gabriel only smiled and said, "Names must be written for the soul to find rest." The chief's daughter, Amara, began to suspect the truth first. She had seen the priest wandering the forest at night, his lantern swinging like a lone firefly. Once, she followed him from afar and watched him stop before the great Iroko tree, pressing his hand to its bark as if listening. The tree groaned under his touch. She told her father, but he warned her to stay silent. "The man is dangerous," he said. "His God is not the one he speaks of." But Amara could not let it go. She began to dream of fire, of faces in the dark, of hands reaching from the soil. Each morning, she woke to find her window smeared with mud, as if something had touched it from outside. The same mud that came from the forest. And in the distance, the church bells began to ring long after midnight, when no hand was near them. Something had been stirred awake beneath Mbala, and it was wearing the priest's skin. The rain stopped abruptly one morning, as though the sky had grown afraid of the earth. The air became heavy, still, and thick with the smell of rotting leaves. The villagers whispered that Oduumiri, the spirit of the water, had turned its face away. No fish swam in the streams. No birds sang. Even the dogs refused to bark when the chapel bell rang. Inside that chapel, Father Gabriel's voice grew darker with each sermon. He no longer spoke of mercy but of purging. Faith, he would say, his tone low and feverish, is not built on peace but on sacrifice. The villagers sat frozen in silence, watching his pale eyes sweep across them like blades of ice. The two altar boys, those silent shadows who followed him everywhere, had grown thinner, their skin grayish, as if the sun could no longer find them. Then came the second disappearance. Nkem, the potter's wife, was last seen sweeping her doorstep after sunset. By morning, only her broom remained, its straw blackened at the edges, smelling faintly of burnt flesh. Her husband wept before the chief, begging for help, but Father Gabriel said calmly, "She wandered into the forest of her own will. The Lord punishes those who cling to idols." That night, the men of Mbala gathered their courage. Torches in hand, they followed her footprints toward Obentu. The forest stood silent, the air colder than the open plain. As they entered, their fire dimmed, flickering blue instead of orange. They found Nkem's necklace hanging from a low branch, still warm to the touch, and a circle drawn in ash around the tree roots. Inside the circle, 3 symbols carved deep into the soil glowed faintly in the dark. When they returned, Father Gabriel was already waiting at the village gate. His robe was soaked in sweat, though he claimed to have been praying all night. He touched one of the men on the forehead, whispering, "The devil hides in curiosity." The man fell ill the next day. His skin blistered like clay left too close to flame. By now, the village no longer whispered, they trembled. Mothers forbade their children from leaving after dusk. Drums stopped beating. The market grew empty. And always, the chapel bell rang at midnight, though no one saw the priest's hand pull its rope. Amara could not sleep. Her dreams had grown worse, now filled with the image of her mother's grave, water rising from beneath it. Each time she saw Father Gabriel's shadow standing by, head bowed, murmuring prayers that sounded like curses. One evening she decided to follow him again. The moon was thin and dying, its light barely touching the path. Father Gabriel moved like something half alive, his robe dragging, his breath visible though the air was warm. He walked to the river that bordered the forest, knelt by its bank, and opened the wooden chest his boys always carried. Inside were bones. Tiny, delicate bones wrapped in pieces of cloth marked with the same strange symbols from the chapel wall. As Amara watched, the priest took one of the bones, a child's rib by its size, and pressed it to his lips. He whispered in that same language that burned the ears. Then he dropped it into the water. The river hissed. Steam rose, carrying a stench like burning hair. Amara stumbled backward, breaking a branch underfoot. Father Gabriel's head snapped up, eyes glowing faintly blue in the moonlight. "Who's there?" he hissed, not in English, not in the tongue of Mbala, but something older, something that made her blood turn cold. Ran. Through the brush, through the thorns, her heart pounding against her ribs like drums at a funeral. She didn't stop until she burst into her father's hut, breathless. But when she told him what she'd seen, the chief only shook his head. "You must not speak of it," he warned. "If the curse hears its name, it grows stronger." But the curse was already listening. That night the sky cracked open. Thunder rolled across Mbala like the roar of a dying god. Rain fell not as water but as mud, thick, black and foul-smelling. The villagers stayed inside, praying to whatever would listen. And in the chapel, Father Gabriel stood before his altar, his robe soaked, his face expressionless. The 2 boys lay kneeling at his feet, heads bowed, trembling. "Tonight," he said, "the Lord claims this land. The old gods will drown in their own blood." He raised his hands and began to chant. The walls shook. The symbols he had painted months ago began to move. Literally move, slithering across the plaster like living worms of ink. The boys screamed. Their bodies convulsed, their mouths stretching wide as invisible hands forced their heads back. Then silence. When the storm passed, the villagers found the chapel door wide open. Inside there was no sign of Father Gabriel or the boys. Only the smell of iron and a single object left on the altar. A shovel. Its blade was buried halfway into the wooden floor. For days no one dared to touch it. But Amara felt drawn to it, as if something called her name from beneath the wood. Finally one night she entered the chapel alone. Her lantern flickered as she knelt beside the shovel. The earth beneath it was damp, darker than the rest of the floor. When she pressed her ear close, she thought she heard breathing. Hands shaking, she lifted the shovel and began to dig. The soil was soft, too soft, as though it had been turned recently. The deeper she dug, the colder it became. Her breath formed mist. Then, clank! The shovel struck something solid. She leaned closer, brushing away the dirt, and froze. It was a skull. But it was no ordinary skull, it was his. Father Gabriel's. The same sunken cheeks, the same jawline, the same cracked tooth she'd noticed when he smiled. Yet the body wearing his robe still walked the forest. Before she could scream, a voice behind her whispered, "You shouldn't have looked." He turned. The lantern light flickered, and there he stood, Father Gabriel. His skin was gray, his eyes hollow like burned-out candles. The air reeked of damp soil. "You should not disturb what's already buried," he said, stepping closer. "I was chosen long before your people had a name for the stars. I wear his flesh because flesh is the door between worlds." Amara stumbled back, clutching the shovel. "You're not a man," she whispered. "No," the thing smiled. "I am what your ancestors feared and your new god welcomed." The ground trembled. From the hole she had dug, hands began to rise, thin, rotting, covered in soil. The hands of those lost from Mbala. Ika. Others. They clawed toward her, reaching for her feet. Amara swung the shovel wildly, screaming prayers, curses, anything. The creature's laughter filled the chapel, echoing through the rafters like a swarm of crows. Then she struck it hard across the face. The blow tore the mask of flesh clean from its skull. Beneath it was not bone but something moving, shifting like molten shadow. The priest staggered back, shrieking not in pain but in rage. "You think death ends me," it howled. "I am buried in every faith that forgets its roots." The walls of the chapel began to crack. The symbols bled light. Outside, the bell tolled again, once, twice, 13 times, before the tower collapsed in flame. Amara fled into the storm. Behind her, the chapel burned, and from within the fire came the sound of weeping, hundreds of voices crying in unison, then fading into the night. When the dawn came, the forest was silent once more. Father Gabriel was never seen again. But where the chapel had stood, the earth remained blackened, and nothing ever grew there. Those who passed by swore they heard a faint sound beneath the soil, a heartbeat, slow and steady. Amara never spoke of what she saw, but every night she sat by her window, staring at the forest, waiting for the bell to ring again. Because in Mbala, they say the priest still walks when the moon dies, and those who hear the midnight bell are the next to be buried. The sun never rose over Mbala again. The next morning, the villagers woke to a sky the color of bruises. The river was silent, and the air felt thick, as if the world itself held its breath. Goats refused to eat. Infants cried without tears. And in the center of the village, where the chapel had once stood, the earth pulsed like something alive. For days, the elders tried to deny it. They said it was just the soil breathing after the rain. But Amara knew better. She could feel it, the same cold pulse that had throbbed beneath her feet the night she dug up the priest's skull. Her father, Chief Okoro, summoned the oldest diviner left in the province, a frail woman named Ayabo, whose eyes were blind but whose dreams still saw. She arrived carried in a woven chair, muttering prayers. When they told her what had happened, she smiled sadly. "Fools," she said. "You buried a man without burying his sin." Amara watched as Ayabo knelt by the burnt ground. She placed her palms flat on the soil, whispering in an ancient tongue that no one else understood. Then her body stiffened. Her back arched, her mouth opened in a silent scream, and her eyes rolled white. When she spoke, her voice was not her own. "The priest you welcomed was no man of God. He was a mirror, a vessel carved by the old ones, filled with every forgotten prayer and every unburied ghost. You fed him your faith, and now he feeds on your souls." Then her body went limp. The men rushed to lift her, but her hands were already turning black, veins crawling with what looked like ink. She was dying, melting into the ground as though the earth was reclaiming her. The last words she whispered were, "Find the true grave, or be swallowed whole." That night the first child disappeared. His name was Ifani, no more than 6. His mother said she heard footsteps near her hut, then the sound of someone whispering her son's name. By morning his bed was empty, his window open, and a trail of muddy footprints led straight toward the old chapel grounds. Amara followed the tracks herself. They led to the edge of the blackened pit where the chapel had burned. The soil there was no longer firm, it was soft, warm, breathing. She pressed her palm against it and drew back with a gasp. It was pulsing like a heartbeat. And beneath it voices. Faint, whispering, rising and falling like 1,000 buried throats murmuring prayers in the dark. Amara stumbled backward, clutching her chest. Then the ground moved. A hand burst through the earth, pale, skeletal, clutching the air. Then another. Then another. They came crawling out, dozens of them, the half-rotted corpses of those long missing from Mbala. Eyes hollow, lips sewn shut with black thread. And in their midst, a figure rose taller than the rest, robe still burning faintly at the edges, his face hidden by ash. The air warped around him. Father Gabriel had returned, only this was not a man. His skin shimmered like smoke. His voice came from every direction. "Children of dust," he said softly, "why do you flee the light you prayed for?" His gaze fell upon Amara. "You woke me too soon. The cycle was not complete. I saw your skull," she shouted. "You were dead." He smiled, and the earth beneath her feet bled dark water. "Death is only the womb from which truth is born." Then he raised his hands. The corpses turned toward her in unison. The village erupted into chaos. Men grabbed spears, women screamed for their children, but the dead walked through the huts like shadows through smoke. They did not burn, they did not bleed. Wherever they stepped, the soil turned black. Amara ran to the shrine of her ancestors, a small clay hut behind the chief's palace, filled with wooden masks and dried herbs. She tore the cover from an old drum, beat it with her hands until her knuckles bled. "Spirits of Mbala," she cried, "help us! Your children are being devoured." The wind howled in response. The masks rattled. Then, from the ashes of the fire pit, a figure began to form. Tall, faceless, made entirely of smoke and wind. The spirit spoke in the tongue of her foremothers. "You called on me, child. But your people turned away long ago. You traded our offerings for a foreign god, and he became your master." Tears streaked Amara's cheeks. "Then tell me how to end him." The spirit paused. "The curse cannot die, but it can be bound. You must return what was taken. The bones in his chest, the bones of the first child he buried beneath his altar, are the heart of his power. Break them before he completes his resurrection." And then the spirit was gone, leaving only the echo of drums in the night. Amara didn't wait. She ran back toward the blackened ground, clutching a knife made from ancestral bronze. All around her, the dead moved slowly, their eyes following her like marionettes awaiting a command. Father Gabriel stood at the center of the pit, arms raised, chanting in that terrible tongue again. Above him, the clouds spiraled into a vortex. Lightning flashed, not white but red, and each strike revealed his face shifting, melting, reforming into the faces of the villagers who had vanished before. He was all of them. Their deaths had built him. Amara crept closer, stepping between the half-buried skeletons. She saw it then. At his feet, a wooden box cracked open, filled with small bones tied together with red twine. They pulsed faintly like a beating heart. The bones of the first child. She lunged. But before she could reach it, the ground burst open. Roots, black and alive, shot up, wrapping around her legs, pulling her down. She screamed, struggling, but they dragged her waist deep into the soil. Father Gabriel turned. "Even now you resist your salvation," he said, his voice echoing with inhuman calm. "Do you know why your people were chosen? Because faith without memory is the sweetest meat." Amara spat blood, gripping the knife tighter. "Then choke on it." With all her strength she hurled the blade. It struck the box, splitting it apart. The bones spilled into the earth. And the moment they touched the ground, the entire world shuddered. A deafening scream rose from Father Gabriel's throat. Not a man's scream, but the sound of 1,000 voices being torn apart. His body convulsed, cracking, light bursting from his chest. The corpses around him fell, their bones turning to dust. The sky split open. From the swirling clouds above, enormous eyes appeared. Eyes made of smoke and fire, blinking slowly, watching. Amara crawled free, covering her ears as the priest's body exploded into ash. The wind carried it away in a spiral, scattering across the field. Then silence. The earth stopped breathing. The air grew warm again. The villagers emerged from hiding, trembling, afraid to speak. Amara stood over the smoldering pit, staring at what remained of the box. Among the ashes lay a single piece of bone, small, white, glowing faintly. She picked it up, wrapped it in cloth, and buried it beneath her mother's grave. Years passed. The rains returned. Trees grew back. Children laughed again, and the name Father Gabriel was never spoken aloud. But sometimes, when the wind blew from the east, people said they could hear the faint toll of a bell from beneath the ground. Amara grew older, her hair turning silver. One night, as she sat by the river where the priest had once whispered to the water, she felt something brush her ankle. She looked down. It was only a piece of wood, half a rosary, burned at one end. She smiled bitterly and whispered, "Some curses never die, they just change their names." Then she threw it into the river. The water hissed. In every village, in every faith, there are stories of salvation that were never meant to be told. Some priests preach of heaven, but they are born from the soil of forgotten gods. So when the bell rings at midnight, ask yourself, who taught you your prayers? And what if the voice that answers back isn't holy at all?